Teachers, how did a student get expelled on the first day of school?
Story 1. A guy went absolutely insane on the first day of school. The campus for our school is large. Instead of building multiple floors, they just sprawled outward. In total, we had 4 buildings. The story starts in the building furthest away from the main building. This kid stood up from his desk in the first period and started yelling profanities at the kid next to him. He was yelling so loud that people in other classrooms could hear him. The teacher tried to get him to calm down and stop yelling. The kid was having none of it and punched the teacher in the face and ran out of the classroom. Now he was loose in the building. He started banging on doors, most teachers locked their doors, and screaming profanities as he ran. He eventually found an unlocked door and went in. Nobody was in the room at the time, thankfully. He threw desks and chairs around, he tore things off the wall and managed to rip the whiteboard off the wall. After that, he left that building and went to the next. He continued banging on the door while screaming. The school resource officer was in that building and tried to stop the kid. The kid headbutted the officer so hard in the face that the officer almost blacked out. He got out of that building, but not before breaking a window. He moved into the next building. He somehow got worse in the time between buildings. He was actively trying to find people to hurt. A couple people were out in the hall when he walked in, and he went after them. He grabbed the guy by the arm and knocked him to the ground and started kicking him in the face and chest. The other student tried to run away, but the kid grabbed her by her hair and knocked her to the floor too. She only received 1 kick to the stomach before the kid was moving again. He found another unlocked classroom and tore it apart. Then he stumbled into the computer room. He smashed every screen and threw all the modems into a pile in the middle of the room and peed on them. He finally made his way to the main building and was stopped by the officers waiting for him there. It took 4 grown men to get him on the floor. It was one of the scariest times in my school. The people he attacked were all right. They were all seen by an EMT or taken to the hospital. He ended up in a mental health facility and has since gotten better. I'm honestly pretty glad to hear that this person got, brought somewhere for treatment, because as I was reading this was like, this doesn't sound like someone just kind of rebelling. This sounds like someone who needs some serious help. And I'm glad he got it, and I'm glad that everyone ended up okay, because, if they didn't, I don't know if he would have gotten, the help that he needed instead of just getting shipped off to juvie or something. So, Story 2. I've been a 7th grade teacher for about 30 years now. This specific story happened back in about 1997. Something else important to the story is the fact that the school I teach at is in a fairly rich part of the city, so kids often have a decent amount of cash on them. Around this time, many people didn't have great internet connections, so people would look at erotic images using magazines or VHS tapes. Well, middle school boys are rather hormonal, and many of them didn't have access to these magazines or VHS tapes. It was the first day of school after summer break, and one of my students was trying to make a little bit of extra money, I guess. He had stolen his dad's magazines and VHS tapes and was selling them to many other students for $5 apiece. He actually managed to secretly do this for almost the entire day. If I remember correctly, he made about $200 off magazines and VHS tapes, which to a 7th grader is pretty much the same as being a millionaire. He probably would have managed to get away with it, but he ended up getting cocky and began to brag to his friends about how he was rich. I guess he ended up telling the wrong person, who told the principal. The kid was called down to the office later that day during the last period. He never ended up coming back. Instead, his parents came into the classroom and grabbed his stuff. I didn't even realize what had happened until the next day when some of the other teachers told me. Apparently, the kid got expelled almost immediately after he walked into the office. Needless to say, kids, don't sell adult entertainment at school. I had to say, well, yeah, the kid shouldn't have been selling that stuff at school and shouldn't have had it or whatever. I feel like getting expelled from school for that seems a little bit extreme. Like, sure, punish the kid or whatever, detention or whatnot, but expelling a kid for that? I don't know. That seems like a lot.
Story 3. I work in an elementary school, and we had one student who was expelled the first day. He was one of my students, so I was witness to most of what happened. The day started with him being disruptive. He wouldn't stop talking. I put him in timeout and went back to teaching. After a few minutes, one of my other students started yelling that he was peeing in the corner. I told him to stop and go to the bathroom. He just ignored me and sat in the timeout chair. I went over to the phone to call the principal to come get him. While my back was turned, he got up and grabbed a girl and tried to drag her over to where he had just peed. She started screaming and crying. I separated them quickly. Thankfully, the principal came in shortly after and took the kid to the office. I found out later that he had only gotten worse once he was in the office. He peed on the principal's desk, he took off all his clothes and tried to rub himself against the secretary's leg. He bit the vice principal when she pulled him off the secretary. He bit her hard enough to draw blood. He was expelled that day. I found out later that the kid had a mental breakdown because his mother had died in front of him.
I mean, in this instance, I feel terrible for the kid because this kid had clearly gone through some trauma. I guess they don't say how recently the mother died in front of him, but that's extraordinarily traumatic. And to send a kid back to school after experiencing stuff like that, I really hope that he got the help that he needs because my heart's breaking for him.
Story 4. So I've been a teacher for only about 3 years at this point, but in my first ever year of teaching, on the first day, I met possibly the worst student in existence. I'll go ahead and call him Bradley for this story. So Bradley walked into class on the first day of school, and just by looking at him, I knew he was going to cause trouble. He seemed like a kid who was trying way too hard to be cool and uninterested, to the point where it was obvious to everyone he was just posing. He picked a desk in the very back of the class, leaned back in his chair, and placed his feet on the desk. He then pulled out a massive speaker and started to play death metal on the highest volume. I really don't know what he was trying to accomplish with this. Anyways, I made my way over to him and I had to yell at him to shut it off so that he could hear me over the music. He just gave me a smirk like he was trying to be one of those cool kids in movies, before turning it off and closing his eyes as if he was going to try and fall asleep in his chair. I just sighed and walked back to my desk where I waited for the bell to ring so I could begin class. The bell eventually did ring and students settled into their desks. I stood up and introduced myself before jumping right into the first lesson. As I was writing on the whiteboard behind me, I could hear some sort of hissing noise, but I ignored it, figuring it was a radiator or something. But it kept going, so I turned around to see Bradley spray painting on the wall behind him. I walked over to him, snatching the spray paint out of his hand before pulling him outside with me. I had a heated discussion with him where I asked why he did this, did he really think he could get away with it, etc., etc. He just stared at me with a smirk the entire time. I grabbed him by the hand and began to pull him down to the principal's office. As we got closer and closer, I could see his composure beginning to break. Once I finally got him inside of the principal's office, his cool guy facade had broken and there were tears streaming down his face. He ended up getting expelled rather quickly, as this apparently wasn't the first time he had done something remarkably dumb like this. Sometimes I wonder what happened to him. Story 5. I'm not a teacher in this scenario, I'm one of the students who saw it happen though. So this happened in 8th grade, I think. It might be grade 9 though, my memories are a little fuzzy. It was the very first day of school and I was in science class waiting for it to start. The bell rang and the teacher began to introduce himself and whatever when suddenly the door burst open and a girl ran in screaming about something unintelligible. The teacher ran over to her and began to calm her down while asking what happened. She managed to sob out the words "man with a knife" before she went back to crying. The teacher immediately ran out the door calling for a lockdown and all that. As soon as he had left, everybody began to freak out and start hiding, screaming for help and whatnot. The girl who had originally been crying began to laugh, telling everybody it was just a prank. Obviously, nobody thought that it was funny, and we all began to yell at her while she just kept laughing. The teacher came back, and we all told him what had happened. He obviously didn't think it was funny either, and he called the principal over. He took the girl to his office, and we could hear him yelling at her from across the school. Needless to say, she didn't come back.
I don't know when this happened, but folks, I think we all know that in this day and age, especially here in America with school shootings and attacks becoming so tragically commonplace, this is not the kind of thing to make a prank or joke about. That's, gonna be traumatic for some people to hear. That's... however funny you might think it be, or, so edgy don't, because you're gonna get expelled or worse. God.
Story 6. One year I was teaching my 5th grade math class when a new student came in, which I thought was weird because I wasn't told that I was supposed to have a new student. He introduced himself as being Javier, and I told him to find a seat while I called the principal to ask if I was supposed to be getting a new student. As soon as I said the word principal, though, the kid freaked out. He began jumping on chairs and desks, screaming something like, "No principal, no principal!" I immediately got the principal on the phone and yelled at him to come to my classroom to help with this kid. I put the phone down and began to walk towards him slowly, talking to him in a soothing voice, hoping it would calm him down. That just seemed to make him angrier because he began to pick up anything he could find and throw it at me, still screaming, "No principal." I was getting sick of being assaulted with pencils and pens, so I did something pretty unprofessional and ran towards the kid and picked him up before hanging him over my shoulder so he couldn't keep throwing things. The principal arrived, and as soon as he saw who I was carrying, he had a look of shock on his face. He came over to me and asked me to put him down, so I did. He grabbed onto the kid's arms to keep him from running away, and I explained to him what happened. He sighed and explained that Javier was his son, and he wasn't even supposed to be in my class. Apparently, Javier and the principal had gotten into a fight that morning, and Javier had been acting out, which explained why he kept saying no principal. The principal took Javier back to his office, and I didn't see Javier for the rest of the year. I'm not too sure what happened with him, honestly. Story 7. This happened from me before I quit teaching, and it still makes me a little angry to this day. Many years ago, I was teaching 11th grade math, and we had a new student in the classroom. Her name was Maya, and she was super sweet. She was an exchange student from Sweden, and she showed up to class wearing a hoodie from her school back there. It was signed by all her classmates with the words, "We have had 6 years together," written in Swedish. I guess she had gone to that school for 6 years. It was a really nice hoodie, but the problem is that the word 6 is spelled S-E-X in Sweden. And the way that the words were laid out made it so that in the middle of the hoodie was just S-E-X in huge letters. That didn't bother me, though, because, as I said, it's simply Swedish. There's nothing you can do about how other languages spell things. Well, that day, as Maya walked down the hallway during lunch, the principal saw her hoodie and immediately asked her to take it off because it had S-E-X on it. I saw this happening and tried to explain to the principal that it was just the number 6 in Swedish, and Maya backed me up. The principal didn't care, though, and insisted that she take off her hoodie and give it to him, saying he would give it back to her after school was dismissed. She said no, it was very sentimental to her and it reminded her of home. I agreed with her, saying that she probably needed something to remind her of home in a foreign country that was incredibly different from hers. He still didn't listen, though, still saying she had to take off the hoodie or else she would get in trouble. We both kept trying to reason with him, and Maya got increasingly angry the more he insisted she had to remove it. Eventually, she snapped on him and began to scream at him, saying that she absolutely would not take off the hoodie before beginning to curse at him loudly. That was the last straw for the principal, and he brought her to his office, both of them yelling at each other. I went along with them, trying my hardest to reason with him. He wasn't having any of it, though. We all went into his office, where we kept arguing for 20 minutes or so. It ended with Maya continuing to curse and swear at him, and the principal saying she would be expelled and she was not welcome back on school grounds. She left in a huff, and I went back to my classroom incredibly angry. It wasn't a fun place to work.
I'm just going to go ahead and say I don't care if that wasn't a Swedish word for 6. I don't care if it was the actual American word that the shirt was purporting. Don't flip out on a kid like that and everything. No, that is just such a stupid thing for that principal or vice principal or whatever to get so worked up about. It's a word. Chill out just a little.
Story 8. So I used to teach at this really nice school, and it was ridiculously fancy and cost an insane amount of money to build it. It was 3 floors with a large open area right in the middle where you could see from the bottom floor all the way up to the top floor. Well, there was one kid who I'll name Jason. Jason was a bit of a troublemaker, but he never really did anything too bad, just a general nuisance, you know? Well, Jason also really loved slushies from the convenience store down the street. He would come to school every morning with one of those slushies. He did it for 2 years. One year, the first day back from summer break, Jason had a massive slushy cup with him. I figured it was just because it was really hot outside and didn't really think anything of it. Class went on as normal, and then the bell rang to dismiss all of the students. Jason was one of the first people out of the room. In the big open area I was talking about before, students like to sit down there to do their work in between classes. I taught on the 3rd floor, and my door led out to the balcony right above where students liked to work. Jason had the brilliant idea of going to the edge of the balcony and dumping the rest of his slushie on top of the students working, ruining their clothes and all of their work. Well, I witnessed all of it and brought him to the principal's office. I thought he would just get in a bit of trouble and maybe have an in-school suspension for a few days. Well, Jason made it much worse for himself by screaming at the principal, so he eventually ended up getting expelled for it. Jason wasn't exactly a smart kid. Story 9. Okay, so I was the student in this case. In middle school, a couple friends and I found the art teacher's massive bag of glitter that she kept in the classroom for art projects. We were stuck there after school for detention because we had been causing trouble during class. The teacher had just left us alone to do our work while she went to the bathroom. Well, us being stupid kids, we decided that we should pick up handfuls of glitter and start throwing it at each other. I don't remember how we came up with the idea, it just kind of happened. Anyway, it was a full-out glitter war. We ended up covering the entire classroom in glitter and emptying the bag. I'm not sure how we even managed to do it. It was a big bag, easily 10 pounds worth of glitter. The teacher came back after a few minutes to see the classroom looking like a herd of unicorns had vomited in it with sparkles everywhere. Needless to say, she wasn't happy at all, and all 4 of us got expelled for it.
I mean, you kind of deserve to get expelled. Do you have any idea how hard it is to get just a small amount of glitter out of your clothes and out of your hair and stuff like that? That amount of glitter? That sounds like a nightmare. You should be in jail.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.